Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The door at the end of the hall. When I first toured the old apartment building, the leasing agent skipped over the 4th floor. Maintenance, she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. I didn't think much of it then. The unit I ended up renting was on the 3rd floor, a bit dated, with peeling wallpaper and old radiators, but spacious and quiet. The rent was suspiciously low, but I figured it was just a matter of location or the age of the place. My neighbors were few and kept to themselves. The building was unusually silent, which I appreciated at first. No thudding footsteps above me, no barking dogs or blaring TVs, just stillness. But after a few days, I started to notice something odd about the hallway. Every night around 2 a.m., I'd hear footsteps coming from upstairs. Always the same time, always the same pace. I would freeze in bed, listening, half expecting someone to knock on my door, but the sound always faded away, as though whoever it was just walked endlessly down a corridor that didn't end. When I asked the building manager about it, he gave a dry chuckle and said, "Old buildings make weird sounds, pipes, settling wood, maybe ghosts." Then he walked off without another word. That reply sat uneasily with me. My curiosity got the better of me. One morning I took the stairs up to the 4th floor, wanting to see it for myself. To my surprise, the door was unlocked. The hallway was identical to mine but dimmer. Every light fixture flickered as I walked past. At the end of the hall stood a single door, number 409. Unlike the others, this one had no peephole, no mail slot, no nameplate. The doorknob was worn down as if touched by countless hands. I tried it gently, and it didn't budge. Just as I turned to leave, I heard something from the other side. Faint shuffling, a sigh, like someone tired and waiting. I left quickly and promised myself not to return, but that door was now embedded in my thoughts. That night the footsteps started earlier, 1:47 a.m. They paused directly above my bed, then continued all the way to the far end of the hall. I didn't sleep after that. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Over the following nights, I began hearing whispers too, soft, rhythmic, like someone reciting a poem, or a prayer in a language I didn't recognize. The air in my apartment grew colder, even when the heat was on. One night the hallway light outside my unit went out. I opened my door to check and saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow at the top of the stairwell, unmoving, facing me. Then it turned and disappeared into the 4th floor. I tried to ignore it. Truly I did. But the dreams made that impossible. In them I was always standing at the door to 409, hearing my own voice calling from inside. "Let me out," it would say, over and over, growing more desperate each time. And I would wake drenched in sweat. The shape of the door burned behind my eyelids. One evening a knock came at my door. 3 soft taps. I opened it slowly, expecting to see a neighbor, but there was nothing. Only a small, folded piece of paper on the ground. I picked it up. It read, in shaky handwriting, "Don't open it. Don't knock. Don't even look at it too long." I took a few days off work, hoping rest and distance would help. But the 4th floor began to bleed into my world. I'd glance up from the street and see a light on in 409, even though the hallway had no power. I saw movement behind the curtains that hadn't been there before. At night my hallway would stretch longer than it should, warping subtly in my vision, like a funhouse mirror. I'd find my front door slightly ajar each morning, though I always locked it. And once, When I passed a mirror, I saw the hallway behind me continue on endlessly, with door after door repeating into blackness. I finally cracked the night I heard scratching at my ceiling. Not rats or pipes, scratching like fingernails on wood, moving in slow circular patterns. I ran upstairs barefoot, not caring about the cold or the dark. The 4th floor was lit up, every bulb glowing like fire, and the door to 409 was open. Just slightly. I stood there, shaking, heart in my throat. Something warm and heavy pressed against my chest, not physically but emotionally, like the pressure of being watched by a crowd you can't see. From within I heard my voice again, but this time it said, "It's safe now. Come in. Be me." I ran. I left the building that night and stayed at a friend's place for a week. I didn't return any of my landlord's calls. I mean that literally. There was no door, just blank wall, unbroken, as though it had never existed. The hallway was short again. The lights were dim. Everything was back to normal. But when I got inside my unit, something felt off. My bed was on the wrong side of the room. My photos were reversed, mirrored like a flipped image. I went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and I swear my reflection blinked before I did. Now, months later, I've moved far away, to a building with no strange floors, no winding halls, but the dreams haven't stopped. I still see the door. I still hear my voice calling from the other side, and sometimes just before I wake I hear footsteps. Not from above, not from the hallway, but from inside the walls of my new apartment, getting closer. Story 2. The woods behind the facility. When I accepted the night shift as a security guard at the Edgewell Research Facility, I didn't expect anything unusual. The job posting said the place was undergoing long-term decommissioning, with no active experiments, just empty labs and old offices to patrol. The pay was generous for such an isolated site, and I didn't ask many questions. I was assigned Building C, a low, concrete structure near the back of the property, adjacent to a dense forest that stretched on for miles. It was winter, and the woods always looked black and silent by the time my shift began. At first, the work was easy, routine walkthroughs, checking doors, and logging quiet on the monitor. But then, 3 nights in, I started hearing the knocking. It wasn't loud or frantic, just 3 knocks, soft and precise, coming from the emergency exit door that faced the tree line. I checked every time, flashlight in hand, but no one was ever there. The security camera showed only static at those exact moments. The footage would freeze, then resume once the sound stopped. I mentioned it to the supervisor, a man named Owens, who seemed unfazed. "Ignore it," he said without looking up. "That door hasn't opened in years." His voice carried a warning he didn't explain. I let it go. But from then on, the knocks came more often, always in threes, always at 3:03 a.m., like clockwork. I began to notice other strange things. Scratches appeared on the metal of the emergency exit, thin and deep, like claws had dragged across it. The sensors in the hallway leading to that door would flicker on randomly, as if someone was walking through. But again, no one was there. One night I walked past lab room 12 and heard a humming, like an old machine powering up, but that room had been empty for over a decade. I checked inside, but the lights wouldn't turn on. I stood there in the doorway, listening to the humming fade into silence, followed by what I could only describe as breathing, slow, steady, and not my own. I started dreading my shifts. I asked about transferring to another building, but Owens refused. "If you can't handle a few creaks and flickering lights, maybe this isn't for you," he said. Something about the way he said it made me feel watched. Like I wasn't just being dismissed, I was being warned to keep quiet. That next week, I saw the first figure. It was standing just inside the tree line, not moving, not swaying with the wind. It looked like a person, but taller than any person should be. with limbs slightly too long and a head tilted just slightly to one side. I shined my flashlight at it, but the beam didn't seem to reach it. The trees behind it swayed, but it stayed still. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning I found fresh footprints in the snow, leading from the forest to the emergency exit, human-shaped, but spaced too far apart, as if whatever made them had taken impossibly long strides. They stopped just at the door. I checked the logs and found the door's lock had been triggered, but not opened. The system registered a soft ping, like someone trying to open it gently, without tripping the alarm. I showed Owens, but he didn't even look. Logs glitch all the time. Just do your rounds. That night, I barricaded the door with a folding table and locked it from my side. But still, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the knocking came. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. I didn't open it. The following night, I made the mistake of venturing into the woods. I don't know what possessed me, maybe a desire to confront it. Maybe just to prove to myself it wasn't real. I stepped through the emergency door and walked into the trees, flashlight trembling in my grip. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No wind, no animals, not even the crunch of snow underfoot. I looked behind me, and the building was gone. There was only forest, stretching in every direction. Then I heard the breathing again, this time louder, all around me. I turned and saw the figure inches from my face, its eyes wide and reflective like wet glass, unblinking and devoid of thought or mercy. I ran. I don't remember how I found the building again. It seemed to appear all at once, glowing under the red emergency lights. I stumbled inside, panting, sweating despite the cold. The door slammed shut behind me on its own, and for the first time, the alarm triggered. But when Owens reviewed the footage, the camera showed nothing. No breach, no figure, not even me. He stared at the screen and said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he said, "You should probably take the next week off." I left that morning, and when I returned, someone else had been assigned Building C. I asked around, but no one knew who the new guard was. I never saw them, but the reports kept coming in, quiet ones, whispered between staff, emergency doors opening for no reason, equipment powering up at odd hours, static on every channel at 3:03 a.m. One technician claimed they saw someone, or something, standing inside lab room 12, just staring into the corner. The reports were never written down, but everyone knew. Something lived beyond those trees, and it had made its way into the facility, not physically, not yet, but piece by piece, inch by inch, it was moving in. Now, years later, Edgewell is still technically closed, but the facility is maintained. By who, I'm not sure. I've heard rumors of accidents, of disappearances, of people vanishing during shifts with no signs of struggle, and always the story includes the knocking. 3 times, at 3:03. Some say if you answer it, you're gone forever. Others say you become part of it, like a whisper in the woods. But I never went back. I don't care how much they pay, because I know what I saw, and I know what's waiting behind that door. Story 3. The doll in the attic. The house was old. That was part of the appeal. I'd always wanted a place with character, a little worn around the edges, tucked in a quiet rural town, where the night stretched on peacefully, and the world moved at half its usual pace. I found the house by accident, down a gravel road barely visible from the main highway. It had chipped paint, creaky steps, and ivy crawling across the brick like forgotten fingers. The price was suspiciously low, but I wasn't in a position to ask too many questions. I moved in the following week, thinking I'd finally found the solitude I'd longed for. It wasn't until the 3rd day that I noticed the attic door. It was in the hallway, near the bedroom, a wooden panel in the ceiling with a hanging cord, partially hidden behind a light fixture. I hadn't seen it during the walkthrough, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. The cord seemed to sway on its own sometimes, as though touched by a breeze that didn't exist. I ignored it at first. What attic doesn't make a little noise? But the soft tapping, like fingernails against wood, grew more persistent. Late at night, when the house was dark and still, I would hear shifting above me. Not rats, not raccoons, heavy deliberate movements. I finally pulled the cord one morning. The stairs creaked as they extended downward, groaning as if resisting. The attic was dim, dust swirling in narrow beams of light from the slats in the roof. At first I didn't see anything unusual. Old boxes, yellowed newspapers, a broken trunk with cracked leather straps. But then I saw her. In the far corner, half hidden under a moth-eaten sheet, sat a porcelain doll. She was small, maybe a foot tall, dressed in a faded blue dress with lace cuffs. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and though her face was cracked in places, her expression was hauntingly serene. Something about her made my stomach twist. I left her there, untouched, and closed the attic again. But that night, the tapping began anew, faster, more urgent. A week passed. I tried to ignore the sounds, but they followed me from room to room. Tapping in the walls, the sound of soft footsteps overhead. Once I woke to find the attic door slightly open, just a crack. I hadn't opened it since the day I saw the doll. I pushed a chair under it, told myself it was just old hinges, just warping wood. But then I started finding things moved around the house. Keys placed where I hadn't left them. Cabinets open when I swore I'd shut them. I began to feel watched. Not all the time, just when I was alone. Which, in that house, was always. One morning I woke to find the doll on my kitchen table. I stood frozen in the doorway, heart hammering, staring into her painted blue eyes. Her dress was damp. The wood of the table beneath her warped slightly, as if she'd been soaking. I picked her up, hands trembling, and carried her back to the attic. I placed her exactly where she had been, under the sheet, and said aloud, "You stay here." It felt foolish, talking to an inanimate object. But as I backed away, I thought I saw her blink, just once. I told myself it was the dust in my eyes. I closed the attic and locked the hallway door. The next night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, she stood at the foot of my bed, taller now. Her porcelain face cracked wide open at the mouth like a smile that had been forced into place. She whispered things I didn't understand, syllables that scraped at the inside of my skull. I woke gasping, the bed sheets tangled and damp with sweat. My bedroom smelled of damp earth and old roses. I checked the attic. The doll was gone. That night, I heard laughter, high-pitched and slow, like a child mocking someone from the shadows. It echoed from room to room, even when all the windows were closed. That's when I started to lose time. I would come to hours later, standing in the hallway or on the porch with no memory of getting there. I found drawings I didn't make, crude sketches of the doll, always with others beside her, taller shapes, watching. The house felt colder now, even in daylight. I tried to leave, but my car wouldn't start. The tires had been slashed. My phone had no signal. Every time I tried to walk to town, I ended up back at the front door, as though the woods around the house were looping endlessly. I began to wonder if I had ever really moved in, or if I had simply been lured. One night, the power went out. I lit candles and sat in the living room, listening to the wind rattle the windows. But the wind was wrong. It was coming from inside the house. A cold gust blew out the candles one by one, and I saw her again, at the edge of the hallway, watching me. Not a doll anymore, but something larger, shaped like a child but wrong in every angle. Her eyes were too wide, her limbs too long. She opened her mouth, and a chorus of whispers poured out, each one speaking with my voice. I blacked out. When I woke, I was in the attic, a doll in my lap, smiling. I don't know how long I've been here now. The days blur together. Sometimes I hear the laughter. Sometimes I hear other voices, begging, crying, calling out from the walls. I think the house was never abandoned. I think it collects people. And I think I'm just the latest. The doll is gone now, but I see her in reflections, in windows, in dreams. She waits, not for me, for the next person who comes looking for a house with character, the kind of person who loves quiet nights and doesn't ask too many questions. Story 4. The Man in the Green Raincoat. I used to work the early morning shift at a diner that sat right at the edge of town, the kind of place that stayed open 24 hours a day, but rarely saw customers past midnight. Most nights were quiet, cleaning, prepping, and sipping lukewarm coffee, while the silence pressed against the windows. On rainy nights, that silence grew deeper, the steady patter on the glass like a lullaby for the empty booths and flickering neon sign. It was during one of those lonely shifts around 3:30 a.m. that I first saw the man in the green raincoat. He was standing outside, just beyond the awning, unmoving, with his face angled toward the streetlight but hidden beneath his hood. At first, I thought he was just waiting out the storm. I kept an eye on him from behind the counter, half expecting him to come in and order coffee, but he never moved, never paced or shifted his weight, just stood perfectly still with his arms at his sides. After 20 minutes passed, curiosity turned into unease. I stepped to the door and opened it slightly. "We're open," I said. My voice felt small against the sound of the rain. The man didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. I shut the door and locked it, even though we usually didn't lock it during business hours. The next night he was there again. Same spot, same posture. This time it wasn't raining. The sky was overcast but dry, the air thick with humidity. Yet the man still wore the green raincoat, hood drawn up tightly, hands clenched into fists at his sides. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That a man was standing outside in a raincoat. He wasn't causing harm, but his presence disturbed something deep in me, something primal and wordless. I turned off the open sign and stayed behind the counter, watching him until sunrise. When the first light crept over the hills, I blinked, and he was gone. It became a pattern. Every night I worked the graveyard shift, he would appear, always around 3:30 a.m., always in the same spot. I never saw him arrive. One moment the sidewalk would be empty, the next he'd be there, as if summoned by some invisible signal. I tried to ignore him, tried to focus on my tasks, but his stillness gnawed at me. Other staff began to notice too. One night my co-worker Jen whispered, "He's back," without even looking. She said she'd seen him once before, 2 years ago, during a similar rainy season. Her sister worked nights too. One morning, her sister never came home. I asked her more, but she shut down quickly, her eyes glassy with fear. She said no one ever believed her. She said the man doesn't want anything. He only waits. And if you stare too long, he chooses you. Her words lingered in my mind long after she went home. That night I couldn't help it. I stared through the window, trying to make out his face beneath the hood. All I could see was shadow. No glint of eyes, no shine of skin, but I felt something shift inside me. A pressure in my skull, like static building behind my eyes. I blinked and backed away, dizzy and breathless. He hadn't moved, but something in me had. I started dreaming about him. In the dreams, he would be standing inside the diner, drenched in rain that didn't exist, leaving puddles that spread like ink across the tiles. I would be frozen, unable to move, as he walked slowly toward me. His footsteps made no sound. When he reached me, he would lift his hood, and I would wake up screaming, never remembering what I saw. One night, I stayed home. I traded shifts with someone else. I thought if I didn't see him, he'd stop coming, but I was wrong. That night, I saw him from my bedroom window, standing across the street from my house, staring up at me through the rain. I moved the next day, found a job in a different town, in a different state. I never told anyone why. I left behind the diner, the apartment, the late shifts. For a while it worked. I stopped seeing him. I stopped dreaming. But then, 2 months later, I saw a man in a green raincoat standing beneath a flickering street lamp near my new job. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But I knew it was him. I could feel the same chill, the same sense of being watched from the inside out. I turned away and went home. That night, the dreams returned. Now I avoid windows after dark. I keep every curtain drawn, every light low. But sometimes I hear footsteps outside, not walking, waiting, like someone shifting their weight ever so slightly on wet pavement. I've spoken to others online, forums, message boards, people who've seen him. Some say he follows certain people forever. Some say he's not a man at all, just something wearing a human shape, a signal, a reflection, a reminder. One user posted a photo, blurry, taken from inside a diner, showing a figure in a green raincoat. It looked just like him. The user hasn't posted since. If you ever see him, don't approach. Don't speak. Don't try to see his face. If you ignore him, he might move on. But if you look too long, if you let him into your thoughts, he might never leave. And if you start dreaming of rain that isn't falling, of footsteps that make no sound, it might already be too late, because the man in the green raincoat doesn't chase. He waits. And eventually, if you keep watching, you'll realize he's already inside. Story 5. The Whispers from Apartment 5 Billion. I moved into the building in the middle of winter, when the sky hung low and everything felt muffled under layers of grey. The apartment was small but clean, tucked at the end of the 3rd floor, a quiet corner unit that overlooked the alley. It wasn't much, but after a breakup and a string of bad decisions, it was the fresh start I needed. Most of the tenants kept to themselves, and that was just fine by me. I didn't want company. I didn't need neighbours dropping in. The only unit I ever noticed was 5 Billion, directly across the hall. The door was always shut. No one ever came or went, not that I saw. But every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., I would hear whispering through the wall. It wasn't the kind of whispering you can mistake for wind or pipes. It had rhythm, cadence, like a conversation happening just beyond reach, in a language I didn't quite understand. At first I thought I was imagining it. My sleep schedule was off, and the silence of the building amplified everything, but the whispers were always the same, gentle, insistent, and oddly melodic, like a lullaby spoken through teeth. I asked the landlord about the tenant in 5 Billion, but she gave me a puzzled look and said the unit had been empty for months. The last guy left in a hurry, she muttered. Didn't even break the lease, just mailed us the keys. The next night I pressed my ear to the wall. The whispers stopped immediately, as if they sensed me listening. I pulled away, unsettled. I never heard footsteps. No movement, just the soft susurration of words not meant to be heard. I tried ignoring it. I played music, used a fan, bought noise-cancelling headphones, but nothing worked. The whispers would snake their way through, always starting at 2:17 on the dot. I began writing down what I thought I heard. The same phrases kept repeating, strange, almost poetic fragments, below the breath, through the hollow eye, when the shadow kneels. It made no sense, yet the words seeped into my thoughts like ink in water. I started having dreams. In them I was standing in the hallway, looking at the door to 5 billion. It was always ajar, just enough to see darkness inside. The whispers came from within, and though I knew I shouldn't, I always stepped forward. I never got far. I'd wake up the moment my hand touched the doorknob, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. I stopped sleeping through the night. Coffee became a necessity. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that vanished when I turned, shapes behind frosted glass, reflections that lingered half a second too long. The building began to feel wrong, as if the walls themselves were tilting inward, watching. One evening, curiosity overcame caution. I knocked on the door to 5 billion. I wasn't expecting an answer, but after a few seconds, I heard a soft creak, as though someone had shifted inside. The door didn't open. No voice greeted me, but the whispering started again, louder now, and unmistakably close. I stepped back, heart racing. That night, the dreams changed. This time I opened the door. The hallway beyond it was impossibly long, stretching far beyond the dimensions of the apartment. It was lined with mirrors, all cracked, all reflecting me, but wrong. My reflection blinked when I didn't. It smiled when I cried. And behind every version of me, something moved in the dark. I awoke screaming and found scratches on my bedroom door, 3 deep grooves that hadn't been there before. I lived alone. The landlord brushed it off as old damage. But when I asked her again about 5 billion, she grew quiet. Finally, she said, "You're not the first to hear it." She wouldn't say more, but she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand before walking away. It was a photocopy of an old tenant's complaint. It simply read, "Voices in 5 billion won't stop. They say my name. They know I'm listening." At the bottom, written in shaky ink, someone had scrawled, "Do not answer. Do not knock." I moved out 2 days later. I broke my lease, left half my belongings behind, and never looked back. But the whispers didn't stop. Sometimes, even now, I wake at 2:17 a.m. and swear I hear them through my new apartment walls. Once, I dreamed of the hallway again. This time I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the end of the corridor, draped in something that moved like smoke, its head tilted toward me. And in the distance, all the doors opened at once. Behind each, whispers poured out like a flood. I screamed myself awake. And when I turned on the light, I saw a number scrawled on the wall beside my bed. 5 billion. There's something about certain places. They hold on to things, memories, sounds, echoes of what once was. But sometimes they hold things that were never supposed to be. I don't know who or what lives in apartment 5 billion, or if it was ever truly empty. I only know the whispers are real. They wait patiently. They grow stronger when ignored, and they never forget those who listen. So if you ever find yourself in a building with an apartment that always seems vacant, where the door never opens but the walls sometimes speak, don't knock, don't listen. And whatever you do, never open the door. Story 6. The Campfire Game. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my older cousin invited me to join him and his friends on a weekend camping trip deep in the mountains. We left civilization behind, packed our tents and supplies, and hiked for miles beyond where the last cell tower reached. The forest was untouched and beautiful, dense with pines and heavy with the scent of moss. That first day was spent setting up camp beside a small cold stream, and by the time night fell, we were settled around the fire, eating from foil-wrapped meals and swapping stories. It was peaceful, one of those rare nights where the world feels perfectly still, until someone suggested we play the campfire game. None of us had heard of it before. My cousin's friend, Colin, said it was a tradition in his hometown. Simple rules, he explained. One person at a time walks in the woods with a candle and stands still for exactly 3 minutes. No flashlight, no speaking, no movement. Then they return and say what they heard. We all laughed, assuming it was just a spooky storytelling setup. But after some convincing, we agreed. The forest was pitch black beyond the firelight, and the candle's glow barely reached the ground beneath it. One by one they went. My cousin returned first, smiling, saying he heard nothing but the wind. The next friend claimed to hear a branch snapping, but we brushed it off. Then Colin went. He was gone longer than the others. When he returned, he looked pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Don't play," he whispered, sitting heavily by the fire. We thought he was joking, but he didn't say another word that night, just stared into the flames and trembled. Eventually the group turned toward me. "Your turn," they said. I wanted to say no, but teenage pride is a powerful thing. I took the candle, lit it, and walked into the woods, leaving behind the warm circle of fire and entering a darkness so thick it felt like water. I counted each step, stopping after 50 paces as instructed, then held the candle out and waited. The silence was total. Not even the chirping of insects, just the soft hiss of the candle flame. I counted slowly in my head. 1 minute, 2 minutes, and then, at the very edge of my hearing, I sensed something. Not quite a sound, more like a vibration beneath the silence. Then came a whisper. Not words, just a breath that wasn't mine. My skin crawled. I wanted to run, but I held still. Then came a second voice, softer and closer, whispering right behind me. As if leaning in from the darkness, my heart pounded in my chest. I turned but saw nothing. The candle flickered wildly. Something was out there, just beyond the reach of light. When I returned, I was shaking. I said nothing, just sat like Colin, wrapped in my own thoughts. The others laughed and teased me, thinking I was trying to sell the fear. But something changed after that. The woods felt different. The air was heavier, like we were being watched. That night, while we slept in our tents, I heard footsteps circling us, slow, deliberate, too light to be an animal, too calm to be someone lost. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight, praying for sunrise. In the morning we found footprints, bare footprints, circling the fire. No one confessed. No one claimed it was a prank, and no one had gone barefoot. We left that afternoon. The trail back felt longer than it should have. The trees were still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. I kept glancing behind, half expecting to see someone there, a pale figure holding a candle, mimicking us. That night back home I tried to sleep. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a whisper from the corner of my room. I turned on every light. My bedroom door was shut and locked, but the whisper came again, this time closer. I didn't sleep. For weeks I heard things in the night, gentle breaths beside my ear, my name spoken just beneath the threshold of hearing. Colin disappeared a month later. No note, no sign of struggle, just vanished. His friends said he'd grown paranoid, barely slept, jumped at shadows. The last message he sent was a voice note. In it, he simply said, "They followed me home." After that, I couldn't ignore what we'd done. I began researching the campfire game. There were stories scattered across forums and old message boards, all the same structure. A game played in the woods, a candle, a whisper, and then the following. One thread described the entities as echoes, things that aren't alive but mimic the living. Drawn to attention, drawn to silence, drawn to those who listen. I moved several times, changed jobs, changed my name online, but it didn't stop. The whispers followed. Sometimes I hear tapping at the window at night. Sometimes the power goes out at exactly 2:17 a.m. Sometimes I dream of candles flickering in the woods, and I wake up with the scent of wax in the air. I've tried rituals, prayers, science. Nothing stops them. They don't want anything. They don't ask. They just exist in the spaces we leave open, in the quiet we invite in. I think we called them without knowing. I think the game isn't a game at all. It's a threshold. If you ever hear of the campfire game, don't play it. Don't even joke about it. Don't mimic it. Because once they notice you, once you hear them, they remember. And they don't go back to the woods. They wait. In rooms. In hallways. In mirrors. And most of all, in silence. You'll know they've arrived when the air grows cold and the air around you dies completely. And then you'll hear it. A whisper. Just a breath. Right behind you. Story 7. The Man in the Reflection. When I first moved into the old Victorian house, it felt like a dream come true. Tall windows, creaky wooden floors, and antique fixtures that whispered stories from another era. I had just landed a new job in a small town, and the rent was suspiciously cheap. But I chalked it up to luck and the charm of a place no one else wanted to renovate. The house came with a massive mirror, an ornate, full-length piece fixed into the wall of the upstairs hallway. It must have been there for decades. The glass slightly warped, framed in dark wood carved with twisted vines. It was beautiful, though strangely cold to the touch. From the first night I noticed something peculiar about it. Whenever I passed I felt watched, as if something on the other side had paused mid-breath, waiting for me to look back. At first I ignored it. Everyone imagines things when they're alone in a new place. The creaks and groans of the settling house were familiar to anyone who's lived in something old, but the mirror had never settled. I would glance at it while walking down the hall and notice small inconsistencies. A lamp slightly tilted in the reflection that stood straight in the real hallway. A door in the mirror that was shut when it was open in front of me. Once, I caught a glimpse of a shadow crossing behind me, except no one was there. When I turned to look, I was alone. But in the reflection, just for a second, I thought I saw someone else standing still, head slightly bowed, hands folded. I convinced myself it was stress. My job was demanding and the move had been overwhelming, but things escalated. Late one night, I passed the mirror and noticed that my reflection didn't mimic me. I had stopped. It hadn't. It kept walking for half a second longer, then turned to face me with a slow, deliberate movement. I gasped and stumbled back, blinking rapidly. My reflection stared calmly, mimicking my panic perfectly again. I brushed it off, told myself it was my eyes playing tricks on me. But I avoided the mirror after that, started taking the longer way through the house just to skip that hallway. Still, sometimes I could feel it from across the room. A heavy stare. A presence. One morning I woke up to find condensation on the mirror's surface, as if someone had breathed on it during the night. In the center was a smudged handprint, smaller than mine, but elongated, with fingers too thin. I wiped it away with a cloth, but the outline never quite disappeared. It lingered faintly, no matter how often I cleaned it. From then on, I kept the hallway light on at all hours. I couldn't bear to see my reflection in the dark, but even with the light, things got worse. I started dreaming about the mirror. In the dream, I would stand frozen, unable to move, while my reflection slowly smiled and beckoned with a finger. The frame would widen, and it would step out. After one particularly vivid nightmare, I decided to cover the mirror. I hung an old bed sheet over it and breathed easier, finally walking through the hallway without tension. But that night, I woke to a soft dragging sound, like fabric shifting across glass. I crept into the hallway and found the sheet on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, and in the dim light, I could see my reflection. Only it wasn't me. It looked like me, yes, but the expression was off. Eyes too wide, smile too thin. And worst of all, its hands were pressed against the inside of the glass, as if trying to push through. I fled to the downstairs bedroom and slept with the door locked. In the morning I tried to convince myself I had imagined it all, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The mirror had changed. It wasn't just reflecting, it was remembering, watching, recording. That evening I went online and searched the address. I found a forum post from 5 years ago. A woman had lived in the same house. Her message was brief but haunting. Do not trust the mirror. It pretends to be you. She hadn't posted again. Her account was inactive. I tried to track her down, but her name led nowhere, almost like she'd vanished. Desperate, I contacted a local historian who knew the house's past. He told me it once belonged to a recluse artist in the early 1900s. He believed they were gateways, not just reflections. That something watched from the other side, learning to imitate, waiting for its chance to replace the original. He died under mysterious circumstances. Found in front of that same mirror, eyes wide, expression twisted in terror. I asked if anyone had removed the mirror since then. The historian said no. The house changed owners many times, but the mirror always stayed. No one could remove it. It was fused to the wall like it belonged there. I tried to destroy it. Took a hammer to the glass in a burst of fear and resolve, but the moment the hammer touched it, the reflection changed. I saw not myself, but dozens of versions of me, all standing in silence, watching with blank eyes. The glass didn't shatter. It rippled, like water. I dropped the hammer and ran. Now I keep my distance. I avoid mirrors altogether when I can. I cover every reflective surface at night, but sometimes just before sleep, I feel a tingle on the back of my neck. A suggestion, a pull, like something calling me back. Back to the hallway, back to the mirror. If you ever find yourself in an old house with an antique mirror that feels too heavy, too cold, and too still, don't look too long. Don't let it know you see it. Don't let it mimic you. And whatever you do, never meet its eyes in the dark, because once it knows you've noticed, it waits for the moment you least expect. And when it's ready, it might decide it no longer wants to be the reflection. Story 8. The lights in the orchard. The house I inherited from my grandfather sat nestled at the edge of an abandoned orchard, a place that once bustled with life and harvests, but had long since surrendered to weeds and silence. I moved in not long after he passed, hoping the quiet countryside would offer peace and a break from the chaos of the city. The orchard stretched for acres, rows of crooked trees leaning into one another like gossiping elders, their branches creaking with age. It was beautiful in a forgotten sort of way, especially at dusk when the light turned golden and shadows dripped long across the soil. But the locals avoided it. They would glance at the trees from the roadside but never step beyond the fence. One neighbor told me gently, "We just let that land be." It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. At night, lights would flicker among the trees, soft, pale glows, like lanterns swaying on invisible hooks. They weren't the warm orange of flashlights or the piercing white of headlights. These lights were different, cool, bluish, and constantly moving, always at a distance. The first few nights I assumed it was teenagers playing tricks or hunters trespassing, but I never heard voices, and when I walked to the edge of the orchard, the lights would vanish instantly, as if they were never there. One night I stood at the fence for nearly an hour, waiting to catch whoever it was in the act. Instead, I saw a light rise slowly behind a tree, pause, and then drift horizontally through the air without a sound. Curiosity overcame caution. I ventured into the orchard just before sunset, walking the old dirt paths lined with fallen apples and gnarled roots. It was quiet, unnaturally so. No birdsong, no rustling, just the distant hum of wind through branches. I found remnants of my grandfather's tools rusting in place. I found a collapsed wooden ladder, a forgotten boot, and the remains of a shed overtaken by vines. It was like the land had frozen in time the moment he stopped tending it. As I turned to head back, I caught movement in the trees, A light. Just a flicker, maybe 20 yards away. I froze watching it blink once, then disappear. Something about it didn't feel right. It wasn't just light. It felt like it was watching me. That night I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and stayed awake in bed listening for sounds I couldn't name. At 3:12 a.m., I woke with a start. The room was glowing faintly. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. There in the orchard were dozens of lights, not scattered, but aligned, in rows like the trees themselves. Each light hovered at head height, pulsing gently, flickering without rhythm. They didn't move this time. They just waited. I stared for minutes that felt like hours. Then, all at once, they blinked out. The orchard returned to black. And I somehow felt as if they had seen me. Over the next week, the lights returned each night, always appearing at the same time, always vanishing if I got too close. I started reading my grandfather's old journals, hoping to find some mention of them. In one faded entry he wrote, "The lights came again. I stayed still. They passed by me not seeing, or maybe they did, and simply allowed me to remain." Another entry said, "Don't follow them. They know when you're curious. They lead you deeper." The final one chilled me to the bone. I think I followed too far last time. I saw what was inside the light. That page was smeared, the ink warped by water or tears. I asked the town historian if anyone had ever gone missing near the orchard. Her face tightened, and she hesitated before nodding. "Old stories," she said. "Farm hands, travelers, even children. Gone without trace, always after dusk. Always near those trees." She lowered her voice and added, "My grandmother used to say the orchard remembers, that it calls to the lonely." I didn't tell her about the lights. I didn't need to. I could see in her eyes she already knew. I began wondering if my grandfather had tried to warn me, if the house, the land, the inheritance, had all been a way of passing along something he could never fully explain. Then one night the lights came closer. Instead of hovering among the trees, they drifted toward the house, slowly, methodically. I turned off every light inside, held my breath, and watched from behind the couch as faint glows floated past the window. One brushed the glass, and for a moment I saw something inside it. A shape, a figure, but warped, like a face stretched behind plastic. It vanished before I could make sense of it. That night the lights stayed until dawn. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, heart racing, waiting for them to leave. When the sun finally rose, they dissolved like mist, leaving no trace behind except a strange hum that lingered in my ears. I decided to leave. I packed quickly, telling myself I'd return later, with people with answers. But as I loaded my car, I glanced back one last time at the orchard. A single light flickered at the tree line, then another, then another. A line of them, like sentinels watching me go. I turned away and drove. I haven't returned. I still own the house, technically, but it sits empty now, the orchard untouched. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the lights, of them pressing against the windows, of them calling without sound, of my grandfather's voice whispering, "They never leave, they wait." If you ever inherit a home near an old orchard, and the locals refuse to enter the trees, listen to them. If you see lights dancing at night, do not follow. Do not investigate. And above all else, never go when they come to the edge, because they aren't just lights. They are something older, something hungry, and they remember the ones who saw them and turned away. Story 9. The Locked Room in Cabin 12. There's a small lakeside resort nestled deep in the northern woods, made up of scattered log cabins that have stood for nearly a century. I found the place by accident while planning a solo retreat after a particularly hard year. The brochure promised seclusion, silence, and an escape into nature. When I arrived, the check-in process was smooth, the staff polite but quiet, and I was handed the key to cabin 12, a small but cozy place set slightly apart from the others, its porch overlooking the calm, glassy surface of the lake. It was perfect, until I noticed something odd the moment I stepped inside. The layout was fine, the furniture rustic and welcoming, but on the far wall of the bedroom, there was a door, a second door, and it was sealed shut. It wasn't locked with a key or even nailed down. It had no doorknob, no keyhole, nothing. Just a thick, painted-over wooden slab set flush against the wall with faint outlines and the suggestion of a frame. It didn't match the rest of the cabin's decor, and when I knocked on it out of curiosity, it sounded hollow. I asked at the front desk later that day if there had been renovations, and the young woman working there stiffened. She avoided eye contact and simply said, "12's always had that door. Don't worry about it." I tried to laugh it off, but her expression was too rehearsed, too practiced, like she had said that line many times before. That night the sound started. Just after midnight I heard a faint knocking, not loud, just steady, coming from inside that sealed door. It was slow and rhythmic, almost like breathing, and it continued for minutes. I froze in bed, heart pounding, waiting for it to stop. Eventually it did. I lay awake for hours, unable to shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been behind that door. The next day, I searched the exterior wall of the cabin. No sign of a second room, just log siding and a small window that didn't match anything inside. I tried shining a flashlight through the cracks, but all I saw was blackness. It was as if the space didn't exist on the outside. The staff grew distant when I asked about it again. An older groundskeeper finally pulled me aside and whispered, "It's best to leave that door alone. People have tried before. Sometimes they don't sleep right after. Sometimes they leave early. Sometimes they don't leave at all." I pressed for more, but he just shook his head and walked away. That evening I sat by the lake, watching the reflection of the stars ripple across the water. The woods were silent, too silent. Even the frogs and insects seemed to avoid the cabin's perimeter. I felt eyes on me, like something was watching from inside the walls, waiting for the right moment. That night, I placed a chair under the Dawn Noble's frame and sat facing it, determined to stay awake. At 12:03 a.m., the knocking began again. This time it was louder, insistent. I held my breath and leaned closer. The sound changed. It wasn't just knocking. It was scratching, slow and deliberate, like nails on wood. Then, a voice, soft and muffled, like someone speaking through fabric. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading. I stumbled back, heart racing. It stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of my breathing and the faint echo of the lake wind brushing the cabin walls. The next day I considered leaving. I packed a small bag, stood at the door, but something held me back. Not fear, something stranger. A pull like curiosity warped into gravity. I found myself sitting by the sealed door again that afternoon, pressing my palm to it, feeling an impossible chill seep through the wood. The staff avoided me entirely now, as if they already knew what would happen. That night, I didn't sit guard. I tried to sleep, but at 3:16 a.m., I awoke to find the door slightly ajar, not open, just cracked. A thin sliver of blackness beyond it, darker than anything I'd ever seen. I blinked, and the gap was gone. It was sealed again, just as before. But the air in the room had changed. It was heavier, and the temperature had dropped. I dreamt that night of a room filled with mirrors. A figure sat in the corner, not moving, not breathing, just watching me through the glass. When I woke, I found handprints, small, childlike prints, on the inside of the cabin windows, pressed into the fog. I was alone. I knew I had to leave. I drove away the next morning without checking out, my heart pounding until I reached the edge of the forest. I never looked back, but for weeks after, I would wake at 3:16 a.m. with the sound of knocking in my ears. Once, in my apartment, I found my closet door cracked open with a sliver of darkness inside that didn't reflect any light, just like Cabin 12. Years later, I saw an article online. A guest had gone missing from the same resort. They were last seen staying in Cabin 12. The staff said they left without a word. Car still parked. Bed still made. When the authorities investigated, they found something chilling. A note carved into the inside of the sealed door. Just 5 words. Please don't open from inside. That message haunts me. I wonder if the door ever truly opened, or if it was always slightly ajar, waiting for the right person to come close enough, curious enough, lost enough to listen. If you ever stay in an old cabin and find a door that doesn't open, don't knock, don't listen. And above all, don't wait to see what knocks back. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some rooms aren't meant to be entered. And some places are better left undisturbed, because whatever sleeps behind those walls may not stay asleep forever. Story 10. The trail that wasn't there yesterday. I had always loved hiking. It was one of the few ways I could truly clear my head and connect with something beyond the constant rush of modern life. One weekend, feeling especially drained, I decided to visit a lesser-known national park a few hours away, a place I had only heard about through word of mouth. The maps were outdated, and the trails were said to be poorly marked, but the scenery was breathtaking. When I arrived, the air smelled of pine and moss, and the wind whispered softly through towering trees that seemed to stretch higher than I'd ever seen. The ranger station was unmanned, so I left a note in the guest ledger and set off with my backpack and GPS, expecting only silence and solitude. The trail I followed was overgrown but still recognizable. Leaves crunched beneath my boots, and the distant cry of birds echoed gently through the forest. About 3 miles in, I came across a path I didn't remember seeing on the map. It wasn't well worn like the others. Instead, it was freshly exposed, as though someone or something had cleared it recently. The branches seemed deliberately pulled aside, the undergrowth pressed flat as if expecting travelers. I hesitated. I should have kept walking, but something about that trail called to me, not in a mystical way, but in a quiet, persuasive whisper that seemed to echo in my chest rather than my ears. I stepped off the main route and into the unknown. The first thing I noticed was how quickly the forest changed. The light dimmed despite the time of day, as if the sun had been filtered through denser leaves. The temperature dipped, and the air thickened with dampness, and the scent of earth left too long undisturbed. As I walked, the sounds of the forest began to fade. No more birdsong, no more rustling branches, just the steady beat of my footsteps and the occasional crack of a twig beneath my weight. The deeper I went, the more unnatural it began to feel. Trees grew in strange, spiraling patterns. Stones arranged themselves in odd formations, not quite random and not quite deliberate. The trail continued to wind, impossibly long, and my sense of time began to blur. After what felt like hours, I realized my GPS had stopped tracking. The device blinked blankly, searching for a signal that wouldn't come. My compass spun slowly in circles no matter which way I turned. I wasn't just off the trail, I was off the map. I decided to retrace my steps, but the path behind me had vanished. The flattened grass had sprung back to life, branches closed in like clasped hands, and all signs of a trail were gone. I turned in circles, heart racing, trying to remember landmarks. But everything looked the same. The trees, the rocks, the slope of the land. It was all too uniform, too deliberately nondescript, as if designed to disorient. I tried not to panic. I set up a small camp, figuring I'd wait for daylight to regain my bearings, but that night the woods didn't rest. I heard footsteps outside my tent. Light, careful ones circling me again and again, never straying too far but never coming close enough to confront. Once I saw a silhouette, a tall, narrow figure standing completely still among the trees. I shined my flashlight at it, and it disappeared. No sound, no movement, just gone. Then came the whispers, faint and wordless, like wind passing through hollow reeds, but unmistakably intentional. They weaved through the forest around me, making it impossible to sleep. I stayed curled up, eyes wide, clutching a knife I didn't remember packing. At dawn I broke camp and started walking. Any direction, every direction. Nothing changed. I walked for what felt like hours, then days. My supplies ran low, then out entirely, but I didn't weaken the way I should have. Hunger gnawed at me, but I kept walking. Sleep became a vague memory. My watch had stopped ticking. My phone died even though I hadn't used it, and the forest didn't age. Leaves didn't fall. The sun never shifted. It just stayed suspended in some impossible late afternoon haze. The worst part was the feeling of being observed, not chased, not hunted, just watched, studied, evaluated. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing I didn't remember entering. In the center stood a massive tree, ancient beyond imagining, with bark blackened and roots that twisted like serpents beneath the soil. Beneath it was a wooden sign, weathered by time, with a single phrase burned into it. The path appears only for those who are not looking. I didn't understand what it meant. Not then. I circled the tree, hoping to find another trail, a direction, anything. But the moment I looked away from the sign, the tree vanished. I spun around and found myself back on the trail, the original trail, the one I had started on, the one I had left days, maybe weeks ago. I staggered out of the forest near the ranger station, disheveled and dazed. My beard had grown, my clothes were torn, but no time seemed to have passed. My note in the ledger was still damp with fresh ink. The ranger on duty gave me a strange look when I told him I'd been lost for days. He said he'd just arrived for his shift and hadn't seen anyone go out. I tried to explain the trail that hadn't been there before, but he only frowned and told me that particular section of the woods was closed. No trails had ever been cut through it. No hikers were allowed there. It was private land now, or maybe protected. No one quite remembered which. Sometimes I still dream of that forest, of the moment the trail first appeared, and in the dream, I always make the same mistake. I follow it. I walk willingly into the unknown, and I know that one day, if I return to that park, the trail will be there again, waiting. Because it's not just a path through the woods. It's a path through something older, something watching, something patient. And every now and then, it opens just wide enough for someone like me, someone tired, someone curious, someone looking for something they don't realize they've lost. And once it finds them, it doesn't let go.